welcome to today's art session. Today we're going to draw the mouth. We're going to simplify the information, developing from line to shape to form, working through value, creating the beautiful illusion of a beautiful mouth. And we're also going to be working on our patience, trying to develop layer by layer and rendering the lines and shapes into that beautiful light, also by extracting it with eraser and all the multitude techniques that we can use to create a beautiful drawing. So here we go. So these are graphite pencils. I have a selection of HB, 2B, 4B, and 6B. I have a paper blender, and I have several erasers here. I start with my hardest, lightest pencil, and I would usually start with a 2H. Following the general rule of biggest to smallest, simplest to more complex, and lightest to darkest. So I would want to start with the lightest pencil and do a progression into the darkest pencil. So I'm working also on my sketchbook, and this is just sketching paper. It's a little heavier. It's 110 pound. Also great for color pencil. And what I want to do here is I'm going to divide this into upper half, lower half, and I'm going to do two drawings, the profile mouth and then the frontal view mouth at the bottom. So with that, I may want to do just a little line right down the middle, very light. You can actually do an entire drawing, and meaning a full page, and then do a second page. I think with the time we have and the amount of detail I want to put into it, I'm going to restrict myself to that size, and that should do us great. So what do I want to do? I want to follow the steps. So this image that you see here, we go all the way to the top left. That would be step 1, and then to the right of it at the top, that would be step 2. Step 3 would be right below. 4, 5, 6. And what does it do? It just starts with lines. Now, this is the basic anatomy and a simple, easy way to structure your lines, to then develop the shapes, and then from the shapes develop the form, and then work that light to really create the illusion of a three-dimensional profile mouth. So what do we look for here? Now, in terms of proportion, you want to look for, I'm going to work a mouth that is about this size. So I want to visualize that. And with that marker, I'm going to, you could literally start with the size of it. So I would generally say the opening of the mouth, you want to just do a horizontal line. Now it could be this big or larger. That's going to increase the size of this area of the face that we're going to draw. So I'm going to make it about this big. This is about, I would say, almost 3 inches here. And from there, what I want to do is angle. Match the angle, and what I'm trying to do is capture the proportion of the thickness of the upper lip and then the lower lip. Now, something very important to see here. When you see the upper lip and the lower lip, in this case, for this subject, the lower lip is a little shorter and it tucks underneath. But what is important is this angle, and this angle. It's going to really set up, I'm talking about this angle here and this one here. Notice that they're all straight lines as well. And just like that, as I continue doing just a little bit of measurement with these straight lines. Well, some may say, well, he's drawing a fish mouth. That's kind of what it looks like right now. But it will all make sense as we start with the straight line study that is just based on structural foundational angles, proportion, and length. So there we go. I could continue working with my HB pencil and add just a few more markings here. So what are the important markings? So I would say I'm almost finished with step 1. There's one angle here that is, you see this line. Now this is a very important feature when you measure the angle of the upper lip, lower lip, and also the relationship to what would be the tip of the nose or the chin down here. So the edge of it. And when you can actually, when you're drawing a portrait, you're going to look at the angle and the connection of those tips and how they align in order to really have the overall likeness coming together. So this line that you see here, right now you see it a little bit even, although you'll see that the upper lip does feel like it goes further out. So that's what we're going to work next. We're going to begin to break the straight lines into smaller segments. And now I'm going to go from the side of the mouth. Notice the angle right here too. And then we're going to just gently, again, this could still be considered a straight line study. And notice that there's a gap between the upper and lower, just right about there. That gives us that upper lip shape. Now you also want looseness. So remember the grip and how far are you holding your pencil for writing or for drawing. And you want, because we're about to enter that area where pressure, lightness of line, quality of line is going to be a big factor. What other lines do we have here? Well, we have a few that go right to the bottom of the lip, and they just generally give us a bit of the thickness of the lower lip. And that would complete step 2 or stage 2. You want to actually add a little bit of bulk to the top of the lip here, and then a little bit of smoothness to the upper part of the mouth. There we have it. So that's stage 2. Stage 3, we're going to now switch over from HB pencil to a 2B, which is softer and darker. And why am I doing this? Again, started with biggest shapes, the overall, simplest straight lines, and lightest. So what I want to do now is begin to add softly, very gently, a little bit of graphite. I also want to begin to look at the shape of the opening of the mouth. Notice how there's curve and how it tucks over and then it rounds as the curve of the lower lip pushes it up. There's a bit of variation here as well, coming forward, and then the tip of the upper lip. So shaping the gesture of the mouth. Do I want a Mona Lisa sort of smile? No smile. No frown. Adding a little more material. And you'll see what the next step will be. Very light. It's better to do soft, repetitive layers instead of hard, pressured, darker. The faster you get to dark, the less control really you're going to have over how to handle that light. And what you want is versatility and looseness. So I'm still in step 3. Don't go further than step 3, which is just limited to this area. And now I'm going to use a paper blender. If you don't have a paper blender, you could use a brush. Now you want to use a cheap brush, not one of your good brushes. And that would be one of these $1, less than $1 actually, brushes. So paper blender, brush. Most people would use their finger. I advise against it. You add oils that you're not aware are on your fingers, no matter how dry your hands are. As you mix oil and graphite, you create that, unless it favors your technique, don't do it. So using a brush, you actually, and this is brand new, so using a brush, you see how obviously a 2B is soft. It's a little darker than the HB, but it's not releasing that extra dark layer that I'm hoping. Not yet. So it's the patience to build it up. Now, that's a brush. This would be the paper blender. It allows you to add more pressure, so it could move a little faster. But also, very, very important here is the shaping. So I want to feel like I'm actually painting the lip. So the roundness, the shape, and the direction, I want to follow it. And I'm using most of these are circular motions. And already we have a beautiful rendering that, again, my question, when you ask kindergartners, they would tell you, oh, that's a mouth. I'm going to begin to clear some of these lines that were from our foundational study, from that straight line study. Clean up just a little bit. Some of those early. Go back to the 2B and add just a little more graphite. So one of the tips that I give here when working with, no matter if it's graphite, charcoal, color pencil, when you're working material into the paper, as I am right now, you want to caress. You don't want to scratch or stab the paper. You want to caress it. And when I say caress, it's that gentle, low pressure with whether it's a zigzag or hatch motion or scumble, meaning the variety of lines and markings that you can do here. As we continue to build up a second and maybe a third layer of darker graphite. And I'm going section by section. And you begin to see the buildup. And the key here is patience. You just got to be patient. And again, gentle, caressing the paper blender, as we did with the graphite, following the direction. What do I mean by the direction? So the lip, we know it's, imagine lipstick you would be putting, or chapstick here. You're going to follow this. I don't want to go against the grain across, for example. I want to imitate the three-dimensional direction with my graphite lines and with my paper blender or brush lines to create that consistency. Because now, remember, we're working with values, which means we're dealing with how light behaves on this subject. And that's also how we're going to develop texture, whether it's, you notice that there's difference between this skin and this skin, whether there's gloss or wetness on the lips. We're going to have to deal with that. So that would be stage 2, finished. Now I'm going to move to the 4B, and I may be jumping a little fast here. As you get higher in the pencil number, this is a 4B, you want to get softer and in many ways slower. Why is that? Well, they are darker. they are softer, and you want to basically use all of the work that you've built up so far here. You want to be able to see it hold, because this can overpower everything we've done. So the amount of graphite that I put in now and then try to blend can just basically paint over everything we've done. And you could see that right there. So just lesser pressure lines, slower, more tender. And this is if you're looking for likeness. Now, if you're looking for gestural and different quality of line type for your drawing, that's, of course, you find the quality, meaning darkness, sharpness, and also the speed of your line for your drawing. Here we want to just take our time and develop slowly all of the details. By following what I would say are 6 easy steps. And I know I get this all the time. Well, there's not a big difference between, sometimes I hear 3, 4, 5, 6, or even 4, 5, and 6. And there are, and if you can see them, it's going to be mostly with finishing touches of light and those final lines that are just absolutely essential, but minimal in terms of defining your subject. So there we are. I'm trying to stay focused here with lesser amount and just coming off of the lips, going into, as you can see, some of the upper lip, and spilling out also down into the chin. And one of the big things that we're working with as we move forward, we started with lines, and we developed those lines into shapes, and now those shapes are becoming forms. And forms, obviously, as you know, is how we deal with light and value. So we want to really begin to look at how what I'm building up to this point is going to have an effect in the later stage of this drawing. And most people would almost be happy with this as it is already. I may think that this, even as just blended, maybe a little too long, too tall. I'm going to blend some of these lines. Now, the other thing that happens with blending, you turn some of those lines or patterns of line into masses of grays. So you may want to, or not, preserve some of that line. And what I mean is the visual direction and shape of the line, which means you have to also manipulate your technique of blending. And that's also just the style, the tool, first of all, the style, the amount of graphite that you're putting on the paper, and eventually it's the artistry, which is the pace, pressure, and all of those things that I've been mentioning. So I'm going into step 5 right here. And notice as we move forward, as we come closer to the end, it's less work. There's less amount of lines. And yes, you may see lots of lines. Well, look at all the textures and the little lines above the lip. But it's going to slowly become less and less in terms of it slows down, first of all. It begins to deal more with shadow. What's shadow and what's light? And it ultimately gives you all that information about what light is doing. Meaning, if we have something round that has a few cracks in it, well, there's going to be shadows. Notice also that as I draw more shadow, I want those lines to be visible. But as I draw more shadow, this also benefits from just a hint up there to nose. So as I was saying, as I bring in more shadows, just a touch of lines here and there, I also have to consider light. So notice here we begin to bring back, and I'm going to use eraser. This is my Tombow, or you could use a kneaded eraser. As you bring this light right back, and I did it sort of in a soft way because it's still light overall. There's a few streaks of light right here. And there's just some soft edge. And again, it's rearranging values where some things get darker, some things get lighter. And the illusion begins to complete itself. So it all comes down to techniques. Your technique, starting from the grip you choose, your pencil grip. Obviously, even further back with the medium you choose, whether it was graphite or charcoal or pen or color pencil, and how you can use those mediums and your techniques to create rich and beautiful drawings by following a strategy that is your own strategy. I need to go back, and can I go back to my 2B? Of course. Now sometimes you may, depending on some pencils have a little, there's either wax or oil in the compound of the graphite. Sometimes pure graphite just wouldn't hold. So there's, whether it's wax or oil, sometimes your softer pencils are going to be creamier and smoother. So once you go to softer, darker pencils and then you try to come back with harder pencils, they won't receive as well. It also depends on the type of paper that you're using. But here I'm having no problem. Just to go back and add a little more material just right here. And then blend that to create just an extra value for this front light that we're getting here. A little more roundness as well. A little more plump lower lip. I want to think of it this way. There's a top, front, side, and bottom to it. And if you follow those rules in terms of light, you know that there's going to be a lot of light, less light, and then shadows. And even cast shadow, because you could see how the bottom affects the light on the chin, under the lip. And as I said before, if you hadn't noticed, the difference between 5 and 6, you may be there already, is going to be bring in the last pencil, which is a 6B, and do some of those finishing touches. It's really just the cherry that on the top, where it could be a lot of lines, little lines, or maybe even some more blending with this, which is that darkest, my darkest pencil that I'm using right here. And as always, what I recommend, making sure you're taking good looks at your reference. So keeping your eyes on your subject a little longer, making sure you're picking up the necessary details. And not making up information. There's our first profile mouth. And that was a good 20-25 minutes. Here's a different view of it. And you can see there's more detail I could bring in. Again, playing with the back and forth of going back to lighter pencils to add just lighter variations of line for those, what we would call details, and how really getting to know your pencils or your charcoal pencils and be able to manipulate the values that you can create, the quality of lines, whether it's zigzags, parallel hatch, cross hatch, or scumbling. In the end, what you want to do, well, first and foremost, just have fun, of course. But create something that is satisfying. It doesn't have to be perfect. There is no such thing. It just has to be satisfying, and hopefully you learn something new that you could put to use in the next drawing. So that's number one. Now we have a frontal view. So I'm going to go to the bottom of the page here. There we are. And once again, we have 6 steps. We're going to follow those steps pretty much in the same order. Now for this one, yeah, I guess I'll do the same. I was going to switch over to mechanical pencils, and so you could see the difference. But there is not much. I mean, it's using the same techniques. And once again, we go right up here, top left, step 1, top right, step 2. Left is 3, 4, 5, and 6. And it's the same, just the same foundation, same thing we just did. Starting with number 1, going right back to HB, my lightest pencil. Finding the dimensions. So I'm going to go all the way, and it starts as a straight line, basically. From here to here. Notice there's a little extra material at the edges, at the corners of the mouth. So already we could pretty much guess what's going to be coming here, which is that, well, it's going to be a mouth. Now I want to find the center of that line, and we want to draw just a vertical to get a sense of the symmetry. And with that, we're going to find the thickness of the upper lip, and you see that little V at the top. And everything is going to be symmetrical here in this case. Just right there. And then at the bottom, we want to find the thickness. You can make measurements. So obviously this area here in the center is way thinner. I would say this is twice as the distance would be twice from here to here. This would be twice, which would be actually a little lower. So right here. And there we complete step one. Now notice there's a little bit of roundness already at this bottom one. So I'm going to go ahead and add that. And then I begin to see, okay, I see where we're going. And notice that there's also sort of a little bit of a smile where it bends down towards the middle and then it rounds out. Now, one very big important thing, a mouth, and this is the frontal view. Well, it applies for both, actually. You have to think cylinder, how it comes towards you and it moves away from you. So there's this cylinder shape that comes and rounds from edge to edge. Let's go to number two. Stage number two here. Now there's a lot of lines here, and you begin to see how it thins, and all of a sudden you have this big curve. You can break this down. It doesn't have to be exact right off the bat. Break it into simple straight line studies first. This is a variation of what we would consider a general looking mouth. But when you do this from life, you are going to discover there are 7 billion different ways to draw a mouth when you're looking for these features, which is what we're doing here. There's one little thing I like to add here, and you don't see it, but don't see it as clear. So there's this tiny little roundness at the upper lip. What I want you to visualize it. You don't have to do it this way. What I want you to visualize is it's almost like a sphere. And I'm going to round that because I like to see the roundness of these lines at this stage. And you're going to see it begin to show as you also follow the shape as it curves up, and then the roundness of these as well. This is one way to see it, because now you're going to read the light just a little bit better. And you also see how the upper lip and the lower lip connect. So you could see that, how they overlap as shapes. Again, this is going with the biggest, simplest. And I may be making this too dark. And this also applies for the bottom lip. So notice that they're not circles. They begin to be sort of ovals or egg-like shapes. But again, as you look at your subject, you get that sense of the overall. Now, I did it. I drew it. And you kind of see it with those lines that are being developed on stage 2. But they break the line just a little bit more. And I want you to understand where it comes from so you can visualize that when drawing a mouth. We have a line here that's going to show us the chin, and another which shows us the gap between the upper lip and that area of skin that is just a little bit lighter. So there's stage 2. So, as you know, stage 3, we begin to deal with lines that build shapes. Now we have the shapes. We want to start developing the form. So form, we deal with light. We're going to add, still using HB. I generally go this way pretty much every time. So notice those ovals that I did before. Now I get to see how light would round and shadow. I don't want to get too far ahead actually. So, and as we see this one here, we see how it rounds and creates shadow more at the bottom. And the same goes for this one here. Just as it rounds down into the lower lip. Adding more shadow just to the edge of the mouth and to the lower lip. As a whole, basically, we have that just flat and rounding, but you almost see it a little bit. This is more of a cast shadow that's happening up here. The little tiny bit of roundness at the other edge. But it all has, obviously we see the light coming from this direction, upper right. So we have these shadows down here that then recede down. And lots of shadow down here. I mean, lots means harsher. It's a cast shadow. And my next step would be to blend it. So caress. Caress with the line, caress with the paper, caress with the blender. And again, you begin to shape your drawing and create that illusion of three-dimensionality right here as you build light, as you study and read the light on your subject. And this is just stage one. I'll come back, add maybe a second layer. I'm still on step 3, by the way. So you may see like, wait a minute, is he jumping ahead? No, we're still here. It's just, I did add a few extra lines to show you that oval, that, and right now it's looking a little bit like, whoa. Need to go over it, and maybe it was a little too much in terms of the line, the describing of the visual. Sticking with stage 2, I'm going to switch over to a 2B. So I went all the way to here. It's been HB. Now I'm going to 2B, which it's on the side of soft. It's the first B pencil that I'm using. So everything that has a B in it, B is for black. H is for hard. So hard means also light. B means black, which is darker, but also soft. Now, one thing I really want to get here is my line, the opening. So the shape. The looseness of your line. Remember the grip. If you're using a writing grip, no. Use a drawing grip that you can adjust the level of pressure, but also create beautiful qualities of line. I should remind you, the level of pressure should be patient as you build up layers. Line by line, layer by layer, and really enhance those values from lightest to darkest. Sometimes we lose track, we lose our focus just a little bit, and we go too heavy, too fast, and it may feel like we lost something. So I'm just readjusting, finalizing stage 2. You may be in stage 3 already, or maybe even stage 6 at a good pace. I could see that happening. I hope you do it slowly. Even if you are fast, even if you work fast, at your slow is how you want to develop these layers. So I usually draw very fast too, meaning I'm loose, although I try to pay attention to detail, meaning I wanted to have that likeness, but I wanted to have its own qualities. I could do without certain exaggerated, I guess, line work that would be mostly considered detail. More on the gestural side. It's still patient, and as you can see, trying really hard to be tender with the build-up. Now, it's getting there. So as we build that, and some of the early lines begin to disappear, you can begin to see how it went from line to shapes. Now, with light, it's becoming forms. I'm going to do just a bit of cleanup right in here early on. I anticipate what's going to happen later. So I'm just going to clean up some of these edges and some of these inner lines that were foundational. And also with hard pencil, they'll stay there. And the reason I love this little eraser is because you can literally draw the light in with it. And you can see it here. I'm going to do a few marks right here so you could see that. You could see them. So you're not erasing, you're drawing. So 2B, let's go ahead and move to 4B, and we're moving to stage 4 here. So I'm on the 4th, meaning I'm right here. If you're looking at the screen, this one right there. Where we begin to see contrast. We begin to see a little rounding, a little extra contrast. Again, when you begin this, and you switch pencils, be very measured with your levels of pressure so the jump is not extreme. So you can manage it. And what do I mean by manage it? I mean the gradual shaping that goes from line to light, that level of pressure that you're going to create those lines with, or that value, whether you blend it in, should have a little, unless you have harsh contrast, and I mean harsh where you could actually see edges and shift. Here everything's connected, everything's soft. So you want to keep that and under control. Doesn't get away from you. And if it jumps too dark too fast, it could have that feeling. So managing the pressure to control values and also your pace. So I'm just adding more material here. I begin to see a little bit of shaping and some straighter edges. So adding a little more line and thinking about how I'm going to shape that when I blend it in. Now you may be asking, do I have to use a blender or anything like that? No, you do not. You could actually go all the way through an entire drawing like this and never have to use blenders or your finger or anything else. But then it's developing those lines and the shift in those values of those lines that is going to be very skillful, for one. But I would really recommend exploring those blending techniques, those blending mediums, meaning the paper blender, anything but your finger. And when you have to, well, you'll see me do finger once in a while. It's how I thought I used, and it's years of not knowing any better coming out every now and then. It also shows he's losing focus because a bad habit comes out every now and then. So that was 4B, and I'm going to begin to, again, gently bring that new, darker material, all this graphite, without just painting over everything else. You want to be able to use every stage that we've developed so far without losing the qualities, and layer it in, adding to it, not just covering it all. And in many ways, undoing it. So I have to basically shape all of it here. Bring it all kind of together and begin to go just a little bit outside. Now this is all blending, no line. And this is going to give us that expression of the mouth. Once you begin to see this, it begins to really come together. The softness and the patience and that delicate touch that you choose to use while developing this, it really pays off. It shows at the end. It's what makes the difference. Now, before I move to stage 4, I feel like I need to work, beginning, first step of bringing a little bit of light. My choice for this stage is going to be kneaded eraser, and that's going to be here. So just tapping a little bit without rubbing. I just want to tap some material. Notice how that just brings it right out. Maybe it's a little too much. So also you can manage the pressure of some of that tapping where it's just barely touching. And the other beautiful thing is you can shape it. So I could make a nice ultra fine point just like this. And literally it takes a little more patience, but obviously you can't tap as hard because you ruin the shape. But it absolutely demands more, a little more patience if you go that way. So there's stage 3. Let's move to stage 4. Still, 4B, we're just going to begin to minimize the line, really begin to look at, it's almost the beginnings of finishing touches. Some of the shift in value. Let me ask you a question. Have you at all, when working light, looking at the subject, have you squinted? And if so, how many times? Because squinting is what solves that riddle. When you squint, you minimize that information. You can actually see what dark is and what is darker than. You can see light very easily, and you can make decisions on how to work it. Adding just a little bit more light. More line. A lot softer. A little bit of extra shadow on this side. And really, really following that shape. And with this stage, notice there's a lot more specific, sharper, smaller line work. You don't want to overdo it. That's one tip I would give you. Don't overdo it. The more detail you try to put in, the easier you can lose everything you've worked up to this point. You want to minimize and say more with less. Be efficient and have that efficiency be eloquent. There's a nice, beautiful, excellent glow of light. And if you've looked closely, there's a little bit of reflected light just underneath the bottom lip. So I'm going to play with that as well. And remember, I'm still in stage 5 here. And the way that works is we're going to make this also a little bit darker. Not a lot of blending here. It begins to you can overblend. Think of, I always use the cooking metaphor where you could overcook it. So the quality of those lines and the buildup as you begin to develop your own strategies, your own techniques, and the more mouths you draw from life, the easier and also the better they get. So that would be the homework, the extra work. To take it further, it would be to grab a mirror and draw a nice pose. Now, profile is harder. And if you have someone that just is willing to sit there and pose for you, take advantage of that. Great practice, and practice from life. It is the best way to go. Final pencil, 6B. Kind of every time I get here, it's not that I'm afraid, but it's a big jump. Now, remember, there's also 8B. You can go darker than 6B. I'm choosing to go and stay. This is the darkest I'm willing to go. Because I also know you want to push the contrast. You don't want to push it too far. And at this stage, you can almost count how many lines you want to add. When they're this dark and this sharp, you want to make sure you choose carefully. You make sure you're looking at your reference. You need to ask the question, is it essential? Can I do with or without? And the answer almost always is you can do without. There are very few things that you, if you did not catch it in the foundational stage, that's most of the stuff you just cannot do without. And that's the length, the direction, the angle, the proportion. All of these details, most of the time you can do without. And that's where your artistry really shows. How you choose what about this mouth is important for you to bring out, to choose, to add in, to edit in, or edit out. As I enhance some of those little lines, then we need to bring some of these right back out. Because where you have a shadow, you most likely will also have a highlight. There we are. Here's a different view. It all started with just lines on a piece of paper. Lines that become shapes. And shapes that become forms. And that is how we draw.